In this video, I'm going to be talking about Bitcoin, and I'm going to be explaining it very simply. So hopefully, no matter where you are, beginning or expert in your understanding of Bitcoin, this will be of use to you. We will not be talking about how Bitcoin works. We'll be talking about why it's important you start changing your mindset and changing your worldview, because without this worldview, you won't really understand why Bitcoin is important for you, for your children, and for your financial future. So let's get right to it. First, before we talk about Bitcoin, we have to talk about the US dollar. See, the US dollar is going forward in time. So if we have the past and we have the future, the US dollar is a way in which we communicate value to each other. It's a way in which we describe something that is valuable. Things that we think are valuable today, we price them in terms of dollars to be able to project their value into the future. Now, of course, the US dollar is not the only currency in the world. There are many other currencies as well. Every country has its own currency. This is America's political currency, but let's take a weaker nation. Let's say something like Turkey. Let's say Turkey also has a political currency and it falls in value over time. Over time, the value of the Turkish currency, the lira, becomes less valuable against the US dollar. So while the US dollar is stable, we see these currencies fall. And this is really bad. This is a really bad problem for people that are living in these countries, such as Turkey. Now, there are some currencies that fall a little slower. Let's say the European currency, the euro. Most people watching this, or many people watching this, perhaps have been to Europe, or at least know of the euro. The euro is not quite as good as the dollar, but it's a lot better than the Turkish lira. It's a much better political currency. So, of course, we've already talked about the USD as America's political currency, and all the other currencies are other forms of political currencies. Now, let's take the weakest political currency of the last 10 years, the Venezuelan bolivar. That's currency that is just so much worse. It's even off the chart in a much shorter period of time than the other ones. So if we look at the last 10 years, if you're looking at the world from America, from the US dollar, this is what you see. You see the US dollar is something flat. It's relatively stable. Everything else is falling down against it. Now, how long will this continue? Well, the answer is forever. The Turkish lira will always be an inferior storage of energy. It will always be an inferior political currency to that of the United States. Likewise, the euro is not as bad, not as inferior as this, but it's still not quite as good as the dollar. And that's why these currencies all trend down. Okay, there are hundreds of other political currencies in the world besides the US dollar, and every single one of them trades down against the US dollar. So why? Why is it that the US dollar is king? We have a little crown here. Why is it the US dollar is king? It's because this is backed by the most energy. The United States has the biggest military. We have the biggest government. We have the most political will behind it. And that's why it is the king of fiat currencies. The Turkish army, the European economy, or the Venezuelan trust is inferior to this. And this is all that money comes down to. It's all about trust. What do we trust the most? And when you're comparing political currencies, the dollar is what we trust the most. Now, let's take a different example here. Let's erase this. Let's get rid of this. Now let's compare this to something even more stable than the US dollar. Let's take gold. Gold for thousands of years has been the globally dominant commodity in terms of preserving purchasing power as a function of time. So over time, if we instead view the world not from the US dollar, but from gold, something that is an even better savings mechanism than the dollar, what we see is that something has changed. We see now the US dollar is falling down. In rapid periods of succession, the US dollar is falling down against gold. And I'll get to why that is in just a moment. But let's bring in our other currencies back as a frame of reference. Now, the Turkish lira is still falling, but now it's falling even faster, that we're pricing it in terms of gold and not in terms of the US dollar. The euro also has a similar trajectory. It's still the same chart, just from a different perspective here. And then if we go to our other example, the Venezuelan bolivar, it's like off the chart pretty much immediately. And so this is what happens when you view the world from gold and not viewing it from in terms of the US dollar. Suddenly, what was once a stable line, the US dollar, has also trending down with all the other political currencies. Now, why is this? It is because even though the US dollar is the king of political currencies, it is inferior to what many people often call God's money, aka gold, this orange line in this case. So even though the USD is the best political form of storing energy, an actual commodity is significantly better. And so with this perspective, you see that even though this has the most trust, this has the most stability and supply as a function of time, it is still much more akin to these other falling assets as compared to this asset. But then that raises the question, okay, what happens if we view gold from the perspective of the US dollar? So you see, the point is that your entire worldview of what is storing energy over time is entirely dependent of where you're looking from. What asset are you pricing everything else in terms of? See, if we go back to our example of the US dollar as reportedly being some sort of stable store of value, and then we bring back in gold, this orange line, what we see is instead now a volatile rise and crash of this asset as a function of time. See, what is happening here is not that gold is going up in price. Well, it is in terms of the US dollar, but the better answer is that gold is the flat line and the US dollar is falling down against gold perpetually. See, this is what's happening. And this is why people have trouble understanding Bitcoin and other assets, what's really going on here. Because if you view the world from terms of dollars, the inferior political currencies are trending down, and they're trending down indefinitely, forever. This will always be the inferior asset to the dollar. And so if you view the dollar as your form of stability, then you view gold as going up forever. And if you look at a price chart of gold in terms of the US dollar, this is exactly what you see. You see this chart trending up forever for hundreds and hundreds of years. Gold has done nothing but trend up perpetually against all political currencies, because all political currencies always and forever have been inferior at storing value over time when compared to gold. And now let's bring in Bitcoin. When we bring in Bitcoin, what happens? This other orange line, forgive me for being redundant in my double orange line here, I don't have a yellow marker, but Bitcoin is this even more volatile thing, and it's off the chart pretty much immediately here because it's so much more volatile. And so then when people look at this is their worldview. They say, oh, the dollar is flat, gold goes up, Bitcoin goes up in this really high risk volatile thing, and all the other fiat currencies go down. And this is where I would begin to part ways with that statement and part ways with that worldview. I mean, yes, it's true in that if you view this, then that and that and that happens. But the problem of what happens when we view the world from a certain kind of money for so long is that we forget our own bias. And that's the most dangerous kind of bias. The most dangerous kinds of bias that we have are kinds of biases that we don't even realize we have. The most dangerous propaganda is the propaganda that we don't even realize we're consuming. The most dangerous stories that we're telling ourselves are the stories we don't even accept and understand or realize are stories. And we are so accustomed to this green line for decade after decade, generation after generation, year after year, market cycle after market cycle, that we forget this is the lens at which we are viewing the rest of the world. And so in order to understand Bitcoin up here, in order to understand why Bitcoin is super important for you to start learning about, you first must accept this green line here. This is your worldview. This is inherently what you're viewing the world towards. And you have to begin to consider the world from these other perspectives. And so then finally, for us to be able to understand this big, super high risk volatile line perceived from this world, we have to start viewing the world not just from gold like we did a moment before, but now from in terms of Bitcoin. So let's take the same thought experiment, the same perspective shift that we took with gold a few moments ago. Let's pretend that Bitcoin were our stable line. Let's pretend that despite it being volatile, despite what you might preconceived notions of it, let's just endure the thought experiment of saying, what if Bitcoin here is the stable line? What if this is instead what we decide to view the world from? Now, I actually think that makes a lot of sense personally. And the reason for that is because this is the most stable supply. You know, why is gold a better form of stability than a form of dollars? Well, it's because the supply issuance of gold is more predictable. It's more dependable as compared to the US government. And likewise, why is the US government a better storage value over time? It's because the issuance of dollars, the issuance of American political currency units is significantly more predictable than the issuance of Venezuelan political currency units or Argentina's political currency units or Australia's political currency units. America's dollar is the best dollar, not just because it has the biggest military and the biggest government behind it, but in order to counterfeit, in order to reproduce those American dollars, you have to first get through that military. You have to first get through that American government. See, it's not just America's energy and America's government that protects the dollar. It's that the supply of that dollar is protected through the firewall, through the barrier of the US government. In order to crack and counterfeit and manipulate the supply of the US dollar, you have to get through the American government. And then even an order of magnitude more difficult is to create gold out of thin air. Because to create gold out of thin air, you have to either find some sort of massive depository of gold in the world, you have to somehow manifest it out of thin air with magic. And so, in the same way that a smaller government is much easier to penetrate and create new political currency units of a smaller government, America's government is a significantly larger entity to penetrate through, and gold is a significantly larger entity to penetrate through. But Bitcoin is far more difficult than gold even. In fact, stock to flow ratio of Bitcoin is about to surpass gold. Bitcoin, in less than a year, is about to become even more difficult to create than gold. Okay, that is hard for people to wrap their heads around, and that's something we're going to have to frankly gloss over in this video a little bit, because that's extremely technical how that happens, and for many new people it's hard to understand that, but that's something for you to research and learn more about later. But the point is, the anecdotal point is that it's been 15 years. No one has been able to get through that entity of Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin nodes in order to create and counterfeit more Bitcoin. And every time someone has successfully done that, their Bitcoins are immediately recognized as artificial and immediately collapse 99+% in value. And so you can think of Bitcoin as like this kind of government without a central leader. It's this kind of wall of energy, in the same way that America's government is a wall of energy via their aircraft carriers and Congress and the Federal Reserve and all the political bodies that make up the American government. You can think of Bitcoin as having this wall of encrypted energy, sort of, that has electricity back. So in order to get through and manipulate more of these Bitcoins, you have to get through that wall of energy. And so therefore, in the same way that America has a better political currency because it has a better wall, in the same way that gold is a better form of saving money in comparison to America's currency because it has a better wall, Bitcoin has a far more stable supply, a far more predictable supply, and a far larger wall of energy to penetrate through in order to counterfeit this currency. I cannot tell you what the supply of US dollars is going to be in a month. I cannot tell you what the supply of Venezuelan bolivars are going to be in a week. And I can't tell you what the supply of some random altcoin scam is going to be in an hour. And I can't tell you what the supply of gold will be in 10 years, even though I could probably guess a good range. But I can tell you, I can definitely tell you what the supply of Bitcoin will be in a year, in 10 years, in 100 years, and even 1,000 years, okay? And so with that stability, with that worldview, let's start pricing all of our other assets in terms of Bitcoin. Let's start with the US dollar. What we see with the US dollar is it has volatile periods of rapid downwards action, and then in a stair-step fashion continues down perpetually against Bitcoin. Again, if we're viewing the dollar in terms of Bitcoin. And then if we begin viewing other forms of fiat currency as well, we see a similar thing. There are rapid periods of downward debasement, rapid periods of a vast loss of value. But again, keep this in mind, that in terms of the Turkish lira here, this red line, it looks like the dollar is going up from their perspective, and that gold is going up faster than the dollar, and that Bitcoin is going up the fastest in comparison to all those things. Okay, and then if we take something else, and this example, I'm going to use gold here as this black line to avoid confusion. Gold, likewise, has a similar thing. So gold, in this case, also falls down just like the lira and just like the dollar. But what we see is that if you, again, keep in mind, if you look at gold in terms of the dollar, it looks like gold is going up. If you look at the dollar in terms of gold, it looks like the dollar is going down. And if you look at all these things in terms of Bitcoin, all of them are trending down. And this is why it is so critical for people to be explaining Bitcoin as not just number go up technology, not just, oh, Bitcoin's going to $1 million or $1 billion a coin, but that everything else is an inferior form of saving energy. And so this is why it is so critical for you to begin learning about this, because whatever your savings mechanism is, let's add in another thing here. Let's say stocks, a stock market. The stock market goes up more than gold because, well, for a variety of reasons. That line's probably hard to see on there, but anyway, just pretend like it's there. That little tiny blue line that you can barely see there, you know, if you're pricing gold in terms of the stock market, gold is going down. But if you're pricing the stock market in terms of gold, it's been going up for the last 40 years. But then if you price it in terms of Bitcoin, it's falling down too. And so the reason it's important to learn about Bitcoin, the reason it's important to consider these things is that what if Bitcoin is that wall of encrypted energy? That is the most important question you can be asking yourself. If it is not that wall of defense, that wall of security, then it's just going to fall down with everything else. But if Bitcoin remains secure, if Bitcoin is backed by that electricity, by that computing power, and by the mining and the nodes and everything else, if it is backed by that, and it is already that difficult to penetrate, despite Bitcoin's small in comparison to the US government and to everything else in the world. If it is already that difficult to penetrate, that nobody's been able to do it, not even the Taliban, not even Vladimir Putin, not even China, not even super hyper hacker people, okay? If nobody's been able to crack it for 15 years, despite attempt after attempt after attempt after attempt, then you have to start asking yourself, what if this is true? That's the only question that matters. Is Bitcoin secure? If it is not secure, it's going down just like everything else. But if it is secure in that way, then it is the stable line and everything else is going down indefinitely, perpetually. A month from now, a year from now, it's the farther out in the future, the farther down all of these assets are trending down against Bitcoin indefinitely. Okay, and the same way that the lira is always going down against the dollar, and the same way the dollar is always going down against gold, and the same way gold is always going down against the stock market too will go down perpetually against Bitcoin forever. And these periods, these rapid periods here, this is what you need to be concerned about, because these can be 70%, 80%, even 95 or more percent losses in terms of Bitcoin. And that's my encouragement. Start learning about Bitcoin, not because you're viewing it as this thing that will skyrocket up and to the right forever, but because you want to start saving in the superior forms of savings before your forms of savings fall 70, 80, or 90% until they do it again and again and again.